Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the whitetail woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light, go farther, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this week on the show, I am joined by conservationist and author Ben Long to discuss the tools, skills, and knowledge necessary to raise hell. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. And before we get our episode going today, I want to give you a really quick heads up. Meat Eater has got a brand new big old giveaway in which we are giving you guys the chance to win $3,000 in hunting gear from all of our brands. That's First Light, FHF, and Phelps, along with a personalized outfitting session with our very own Giannis Putelis, co-host of the Gear Talk podcast, host of On the Hunt with Yanni on the YouTube channel there, and just a genuine, amazing dude, a good friend of mine, an amazing hunter, and someone you definitely do want helping you pick out gear for your next hunting trip. The giveaway runs from now through May 21st, 2023, so head on over to themeateater.com/giveaway to enter. It's that easy. themeateater.com/giveaway. The winner is going to be randomly picked and contacted on May 22nd. So head on over. Seems like a great opportunity. Now, with that out of the way, I want to tell you a story. So this past weekend, I told my oldest son, Everett, that I was going to take him out on a turkey hunt. Now, historically, I have taken him on turkey, quote-unquote, hunts many times before. And what that entails when I've taken my young son is that we are just out there in the field trying to call a bird in. It's been a lot of fun, but I've not gone out there with a gun. We're not actually hunting. It's just, like a turkey adventure. He's been out there doing that with me since he was, 5 months old. I remember the very first time I ever took him out, he was in one of those little like marsupial pouches on your chest. And we went out and actually just walked into a field behind our house, and we could hear a turkey gobbling off in the distance. And I remember yelp, yelp, yelping, and a turkey gobbling, and yelp, yelp, yelping, and a turkey gobbling back, and just seeing his little tiny baby eyes just get bigger and bigger and bigger. He had no idea what was going on, but there was some bizarre sound coming from the woods, getting closer and closer. And in the years since, he's continued to get exposed to that, heading out into the spring woods, and we've had some really incredible moments. I think I probably told you guys this story a few years ago about the time when we headed out onto one of the properties I hunt and ended up calling in 3 gobblers. And on this particular day, he brought an umbrella with him. And we called these gobblers all the way into, they're approaching shooting range. And my son was pretending that the umbrella was a gun. And he held the gun up and he was whispering to me, "Hey, Dad, can I take him yet?" And I'm whispering back to him, "Oh, yeah, you gotta wait till they get closer. They gotta get closer." And so he's got his gun up. He's all ready. He's breathing heavier. I can literally see him starting to shake. He's so excited as these 3 toms come in close. They finally get into shooting range, 25, 30 yards, something like that. I said, "All right, Everett, take him." And he says, "All right, Dad, I'm ready." And then he takes a deep breath, and then he just yells, "Kapow!" And the turkeys look up, and he says, "Kapow!" again, and they go running off. I mean, we've just had so many great moments like that in the field. And it's never, though, involved like an actual hunt for turkeys, at least. So in this case, I told him, "Hey, Sunday we're going to go out there and see if we call them bird in range. And you can bring your BB gun if you want, and we can, hunt for, squirrels or something along the way, or you can just kind of pretend holding your gun or whatever it is." And he just started to cry. And I couldn't understand it. He just started bawling. And I was so confused. And, after a few minutes and going to his bedroom and kind of trying to pull him out of his bed, he explained that, no, he really wanted to be on a real hunt this time. He wanted Dad to have the gun, and he really wanted to get a turkey, and he wanted it so badly. And I didn't even have my stuff ready. I didn't have my license yet. I wasn't planning actually turkey hunting till next weekend. So we had to kind of explain that and talk through all that. And I was finally able to convince him that we could still have a good time just going out there and trying to call some birds and see what we can see and what kind of adventure we might be able to have. But he was so passionate about it. He was so excited about it. He wanted the real deal. So I convinced him we could still have a good time. We headed out there in the field. We worked our way down this field edge, and I was like, "All right, buddy, let's do a little crow call." And he said, "Well, Dad, can I do it?" So I give him my crow call, and he first tries to buzz on it. It just kind of sounds like zzz, zzz. And I tell him you got to bite down a little more and push through a little more power from your lungs. And he does it again and gets a good, good bah, bah. And then from the other side of this hill, there's a gobble. And it's not that far away. So we're both very excited. I'm saying, all right, we got to sneak to the tree line. And so we go, we just turn, and we've only got 20 yards maybe to get to the edge of these trees. And there's a hill between me and where I think this turkey is. And so we start cutting to that fence row when all of a sudden, bam, there's the turkey looking right at us, spins, turns away, runs off. And in my head, I'm thinking, we just blew it. We just ruined this experience that he was so excited about having. He must be so disappointed. I looked at him, and he's just smiling. He's like, Dad, look at this. And I'm like, what do you mean, look at this? Aren't you upset about the turkey? And he points at the ground. He says, it's turkey poop. And he was so excited. We saw turkey poop. He wasn't worried about the fact we just spooked this gobbler away. He was so excited there was some poop on the ground that I'll inform you, correctly, he identified turkey poop on the ground. So we looked at the turkey poop, and then like a couple minutes later, we keep walking and said, hey, Dad, you got to look at this. You got to look at this. I'm stressing about the fact we're not going to see any turkeys. And then there's this purple flower, and he's staring at this purple flower. And I'm slowly, as we go throughout this morning, realizing more and more that there's something more going on here, even than maybe he understands or that I understand or expected. Because we continue on, we continue our walk, and we're hoping to hear turkeys gobbling. We're looking for turkeys, and then we see brrr off from the pond, and here goes a couple wood ducks flying off, and he can't believe it. There's ducks. We just saw 2 ducks. And he runs over there to the water, says, what about frogs, Dad? There's probably frogs in here. And he's walking down this way, and he's walking down this way, and he's looking for frogs here, and he's looking for ducks there, and he's got this huge smile on his face. And then we finally decide, okay, we're going to sit down and try to focus on turkeys for a minute. Or at least that's what I was thinking, I guess. I'm thinking, hey, we got to get down to the job at hand here. So let's sit down. Let's wait for a second. Stop scaring everything and try to see a turkey. So we sit down, and I'm just kind of getting him settled into a spot on this tree next to me. He kind of leans up against my shoulder, and I sit down there and finally take a deep breath. And then Everett looks over at me. He says, hey, Dad, I really like to sit in one place if there's animals in front of us or if we're eating food. And I mean, there's something amazing about the just incredible, authentic honesty about a young child. He's 5. And I mean, he's spot on. That sounds about right. That's about the only time he'll sit in one place. Well, fortunately, I did have something. I pulled out of my pocket 2 Reese's eggs. These little chocolate and peanut butter filled half eggs that you get for Easter. And I handed one of those to him. And he just turns, and he has this look on his face. Just the only a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or this little kid that you love with all your heart turns, looks me in the eye and says, thanks, Dad. This is the best day ever. And then bam, turkey gobbled off in the distance back behind us. That day, that moment, that morning, the whole thing from his crying because he was so excited about one expectation, to us spooking a bird when we finally went, to him not caring at all because he was so excited about the turkey poop from the flowers and the ducks and the frogs and the Reese's. For all of that is why I am raising hell for hunting and fishing and wildlife and wild places. That is why we spent a whole month talking about this stuff. It's for days like that with my son Everett and his younger brother Colton. That's why I want there to be clean water, healthy wild landscapes. That's why I want there to be well-managed public lands and populations of healthy fish and wildlife and birds and bugs and bees, a stable climate, clean air, the continued privilege and the right to hunt and fish and to explore these places. That's what I want for my boys. That's why I'm doing this. That's why we're here. Can you relate? Do you have a son or a daughter? Do you want one someday? Do you have grandkids? What's the future you imagine for them? What's the future you want for them? Are you willing to fight for it? For the sake of today's episode, I'm going to assume that you are. I'm going to assume that if you are here and listening to this, if you've listened this far, I'm assuming that you are, just like I am, willing to raise some hell to protect these things. And our guest today is going to help us better understand exactly how we can do that. The guy's name is Ben Long. He is a journalist and a writer who's appeared everywhere from Outdoor Life magazine to our very own Meat Eater website. He's a professional conservationist and a communications strategist who's contributed to permanent conservation of, this is pretty crazy. I need to figure out a way to quantify what I do the way they've done here. But he has directly contributed to the conservation of more than 1.5 million acres of land. And he's the author of a terrific new book, The Hunter and Angler Field Guide to Raising Hell. And it's this very aptly titled book, which we will be discussing today. We are going to dig into the nitty-gritty of how we as hunters and anglers can more effectively raise hell for the things we care so much about. Now, if you are a part or a leader or a founder of a hunting or fishing or conservation organization, you're going to walk away today with some powerful new strategies for building a movement, for influencing change, for fighting for a cause, for rallying people to that cause. But if you are just an individual out there who cares, who wants to make a difference on your own, you too will be armed with new tools and insights and specific actions you can take that I think will make you a more impactful individual and an advocate for hunting and fishing in wild places. Over the course of this whole last month, we've heard about many different challenges facing all sorts of wildlife across the world today. We've learned about some of the specific things going on with whitetails, which is our main focus usually on this podcast, the good and the bad. What's going on? What do we need to be thinking about? Most recently, we dove deep into the nuts and bolts of what's probably going to be the most impactful conservation-related piece of legislation to hit DC this entire year. We've learned a lot. But learning something, hearing something, thinking about something, that's just a first step. It's all just happening up between our ears. It's nothing if it never ends up out of our heads and leading to something real in the world. And that real thing that, I think we got to hope that all this leads to, that real thing is action. Action. Action, action, action. We need to take action if we want to keep our hunting traditions alive. We need to take action if we want there to be fish for our kids or grandkids to pull up out of the river or the lake someday. If we want our kids to be able to, fall down crying because they want to go chase turkeys for real. We need to take action if we want to keep our forests and grasslands and swamps and mountains and all these places around for us to go hike across or camp on or bike through, whatever it might be. Action is the name of the game. It's the necessary final thing that has to come to life. And it can come to life in so many different forms. There are many, many different ways we can take action and make a difference for all of these things we've talked about. But it requires a first step. Any kind of real change requires taking that first step. Any little thing does help. Every little thing does get that ball rolling. And I was just actually this past weekend with some folks who were doing that very thing. They were getting the ball rolling. We were up north, northern Michigan, at an event that was a part of my Working for Wildlife tour. This is the second event of our series. This was in partnership with MUCC, a terrific Michigan conservation organization. And there were dozens of people up there, dozens and dozens and dozens of folks. I think it was their biggest volunteer habitat day ever, full of folks who love hunting and fishing and the outdoors, who were doing something good with their hands right then and there. They were working for wildlife. We were building, in this case, small game habitat. There were some cuttings going on to create new wildlife openings and maintain the edges, the kind of like edge feathering. There was a whole bunch of creating brush piles and rabbit habitat, small mammal habitat. This was great stuff for all sorts of critters, not just rabbits and squirrels and snakes, grouse, birds, deer, you name it. But more than just the actual on-the-ground impact we were making on that, 20 acres, 30 acres, 50 acres, whatever that ripple effect is out from those actual places. I think what was extra exciting was this sense of building momentum. You could feel it. You could literally tangibly feel it when you talk to folks there. And I felt it myself. When we were engaging with each other, out there doing something, you could feel this energy. You could feel the good vibes coming from taking some action. We were actually doing something that was helping. We weren't just listening to somebody talk about how some critter is disappearing or how there's this threat to our hunting rights in this state or that state. We weren't just hearing it and worrying about it. We were doing something that in some small way was helping move the needle. And that like switches it moves some wires around in your head, and it reconfigures what seems possible. And I think that action, volunteering, this past weekend, I think that can lead to the next thing. It can kind of build you up, fortify you, refuel the tank for the next thing and the next thing, where, maybe it's not building small game habitat. Maybe it's just, hey, some calls have got to be made. Or maybe the next time it is, hey, we need people to show up at this place and hold some signs. Or maybe the next time it is, you know what, I really got to tell all your friends and family that we got to get out and support X or Y or Z. I really do see, feel, and believe in the power of taking that first step of action and then letting it snowball on down the hill. That's why I hope, more than anything else, that after our chat today, you will feel armed and ready and willing to do that, to take some kind of action, to start raising some hell. Because I love this stuff. I bet you do too. I bet you have not listened to me rant for 17 minutes unless you love this stuff, right? What is your why? What's your version of that story I told at the top? What do you care so much about that it keeps you up at night? What is it about this wild world? Wild creatures, hunting, fishing, the outside. What is it that you can't imagine living without? Think about that. See that. Imagine that. And then let's get to work. Let's do the work to keep fish in the water, keep deer in the woods, keep wild places on the ground, and hunters and anglers out there enjoying them. Let's just do the damn thing and keep the good times rolling, because that's our torch to bear now. There were folks over many, many decades in our past that have done this work to provide and to have kept what we have now here available. We only have these hunting opportunities, these fishing opportunities, these critters, these places. We only have it because other people gave a damn and did the work 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We are those people now. That's our job now. And that's, I guess, the message that I want us all to have on our minds today during this conversation, and as we leave it, and as we wrap up this month of conservation stories and lessons and hopefully inspiration. Let's take this and carry it with us throughout the rest of this year. Let's do that work. Let's be those people that 50 years from now, they can point back to and say, hey, you know what? We've got it pretty darn good because of them. So, with that all said, let's get to my chat with Mr. Ben Long, who is going to give us the knowledge and the tools necessary to do it. Here we go. All right, here with me now on the show for the finale of Conservation Month is Ben Long. Ben, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to chat finally. You know, we've exchanged a few notes over the years, over the web, and I've followed your writing for many years now, and really appreciated your contributions there. So I just told you before we started recording, but when I saw this book pop up on social media a few weeks ago, I thought to myself two things. Number one, I thought, dang it, that's the kind of book I wanted to write someday, but I never got to it. And now Ben beat me to it. And then number two, I'm so glad that you, Ben, beat me to it, because someone had to cover this topic in a book in a packaged way that someone could pick up and get a good idea from beginning to end of how to deal with these kinds of things. And I was too slow to move on it. So thank you, Ben, for writing this book, The Field Guide to Raising Hell for Hunters and Anglers. It's a great read. So kudos.
Well, thanks. You know, it's a long time coming. It's been the seed in the back of my head for decades too. I've been lucky enough to to be involved in various conservation efforts. For 30 years. Some of that beginning as a journalist, and then the last 25 is, kind of a more of a on the campaigns themselves. So I think I haven't ever added them up, but I've been involved in, had a front row seat in about 20 million acres of conservation, and don't mean to brag. I was just part of the campaign. It's not like I did that all by myself. I was lucky to be parts of those campaigns and have a view of how things worked, and learned a lot along the way, and learned about a lot of things that didn't work along the way. So I just wanted to share that. So that's how I put it in the pages.
Yeah. So was there a moment for you? I mean, it sounds like you said this has kind of been slow burning in the back of your mind, but was there any flashpoint or an incident or something where you realized, okay, I can't wait any longer. This has to be in the world. Was there any kind of moment or epiphany like that for you?
You mean the book itself?
Yeah.
Or the idea?
Yeah.
I think, part of how I make my living is by consulting with conservation groups on the different campaigns and goals. And I worked with backcountry hunters and anglers on the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's probably going back 5 or 6 years, and there was an effort to, they did, permanently reauthorize and permanently fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And I worked with a bunch of leaders in Washington, D.C., a bunch of leaders from around the country from BHA, and, did my usual routine of teaching people how to create a message, how to speak to legislators, lawmakers. And one of the, I had a little one-page handout, and unbeknownst to me, one of the leaders went back to Pennsylvania and used the same handout for convincing the legislature in Pennsylvania to loosen up on the blue laws and to increase, hunting access and hunting opportunities by ending the Sunday ban on hunting, and incrementally, but made progress on that. And it brought to mind that the fundamentals of this, the fundamentals of a good campaign, work no matter what you're trying to do, no matter whether you're trying to influence a local county commission or a local hunting and fishing or Fish, Wildlife, and Parks commission, or whether you're trying to get a bill through Congress. The basics are just the same. And so I thought, well, let's just capture that, and something that people can put in their pocket, and you can read it on an airplane when you're flying someplace. You can read it on a commute. You can read it in an evening. You can refresh it. It's just supposed to be accessible and, just the fundamentals.
Yeah. So what's the goal of this? Like when you look at this book and the materials you compiled here, there's a lot of different articles and books and podcasts and films that all tackle different aspects of how we engage in conservation work. With this specific project, I'm curious what your dream goal was for this book? What are you hoping that actually happens? Is this that you're hoping that individuals use this to do A, B, and C? Are you hoping that this becomes a field guide for organizations to do A, B, or C? What is it specifically that you're hoping comes out of this, or what does that success look like?
Yeah. What's the point of raising hell in the field guide to raising hell, right?
Yeah.
And so, if you look across of any group of people, but let's just say hunters in this case, that there's a spectrum, right? And there's generally three categories. There's like people who watch, see what's going on, and don't feel engaged. There are people who join, who care enough to say, okay, I'm going to become a member of my local rod and gun club or Ducks Unlimited or whatever. And then there are people who do, the people who actually go to the meetings, who knock on the doors, who raise the money, who do that. And so I'm hoping that this book, Field Guide to Raising Hell, speaks to all those people and gets more people inspired to join organizations. It gets the watchers to join, gets the joiners to do, and gets the doers to be more effective and to win. And so it's definitely, that's kind of the niche. It's definitely a niche audience, but it's an important one. And I've seen over the years how, the hunter and angler conservation voice is really what tips the scales in so many policy issues. I've just seen that happen so many times that, I'm a true believer that our voice needs to be heard, because we have a lot of common sense. We have a lot of, boots in the mud kind of experiences that people, the people in power trust, and the people who want to make good decisions want to hear from. So just trying to make people, spend less time crying in their beer and more time making real positive change.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I've thought about this a lot. I really do think that the hunting and fishing community has a superpower as far as the impact we can have on, especially on conservation or environmental or wildlife related issues. Because you made a great point. We have that on the ground, real world experience with the resource, with the animal, with the place that's and oftentimes unique compared to most other stakeholders. But then another thing, I think, and you tell me if you think this is true or not as well, but it seems like, the other folks that might be trying to raise hell about the environment or a habitat issue or an animal wildlife issue, they might be folks who traditionally fall into that environmentalist camp that might be a little bit more left-leaning. And so certainly those appeals would be heard by the left side of the aisle. But I think a lot of times the right side of the aisle might ignore those folks completely. And on the flip side, though, traditionally, and I'm overgeneralizing here, but traditionally, the hunting and angling community has that right side of the aisle has their ear a little bit more. And if all of a sudden folks are advocating for these environmental or habitat or wildlife related issues to folks on the left from the traditional environmental community, but then uniquely on the right from the hunting and fishing community, that becomes something you can't ignore any longer, I think. And that doesn't happen without us. Is that a fair assessment?
That's 100%. I mean, it's we live in an era where partisanship is unfortunately very high, right? We live in a time of history when everybody seems to be at each other's throats, and everybody wants to say, that those guys over there are wrong, they're bad for America, and that's not going to go away. But still, even so, 70% of the legislation that passes, even this day and age, has to have bipartisan support. I mean, just in the short term, just to get it done. And in the long term, it's absolutely critical to have broad public support for any kind of conservation measure to be durable, to last over time, right? The social buy-in, the social support, it's just like hunting and fishing laws, right? The idea that the chance of you and I getting caught by a game warden is pretty slim. I can't remember the last time I saw a game warden in the woods, away from the truck. Mm-hmm. But we believe we have followed those laws basically because we understand them. We understand why they're good for us. We understand why when people cheat on them, it hurts us. And so that kind of broad social understanding, the social buy-in, in my opinion, is just as important as as winning at the end of the day because we happen to get more votes. But you have to to create these policies, we do have to get the votes, and it's not going to be a good future if the things we care about are only the venue of one or the other political party. We have to, and there are people on both sides of the party, both sides of the aisle, who are doing good conservation work today, and they all need to be supported for that work. But a couple sessions or a couple episodes ago, you interviewed my friend Doug Chadwick, and Doug talked a lot about kind of the big pictures and how a lot of these around the world there's a lot of the biodiversity crisis, and a lot of nature's in a lot of trouble, getting crowded off the planet in a lot of places. But you look at America and you look at so across North America, a lot of bird species are in deep trouble. Grassland birds, for example, are in deep trouble. Sage grouse, prairie grouse, bobolink, stick thistles, all those are on this steep decline. But you look at what class of birds are doing very, very well right now, or doing relatively well right now, and it's waterfowl. It's ducks and geese, and there's a reason for that, right? The reason is hunters and anglers, mostly hunters and duck hunters, early on recognized the value of regulations, recognized the value of protecting wetlands, restoring wetlands, and those wetlands are still facing a lot of challenges, but we have an infrastructure for conserving them. We have things like the North American Wetland Conservation Act. We had the Clean Water Act, and the duck hunters were absolutely critical to getting that happening. And we're seeing the real world effects. This isn't just like history. This is like playing out now. This is the bright spot. That's Doug talked a lot about how worldwide large carnivores are in dire straits and disappearing across the world. But when you look at the United States, mountain lions are expanding their range, wolves are expanding their range, black bears are expanding their range, wolverines are expanding their range. Why is that? That's because hunters and anglers set the table with the prey species, right? You're not going to have those predators, and maybe some hunters would wish we had fewer of them. But if you like, large charismatic megafauna like wolves and bears and lions, well, you better be grateful that the hunters and anglers have set the table for them, so they can thrive. And so I think we do have that superpower you're talking about, and we're seeing in real time the benefits of that. And I think we need to really celebrate that and tell those success stories, because the doom and gloom does not motivate anybody. The things that motivate people are the idea, the empowerment that, we make a difference and we do good things. And these little things we do, like putting up a wood duck box, we do it enough and we'll bring wood ducks back from extinction and make them. So that's a story we need to tell and own.
Yeah, that's so true. It's interesting. We've got a little bit of a shifting baseline syndrome going two different ways that I think can cause maybe some apathy. And you bring up a great point that we need to recognize what a success we have experienced over the last 100 years, bringing back so many of these animals, and recognize that, right now we have folks. I think there's a lot of folks who are relatively young, let's say in their 40s or younger, who have never known a Michigan or a Montana or a Georgia that wasn't filled to the brim with white-tailed deer, that didn't have all sorts of turkey hunting opportunities, that didn't have, great clean waters and terrific fishing opportunities. We are living in the golden days for a lot of these critters. And so I think sometimes if you're kind of stuck in your little silo, if you're just living in Michigan or living in Montana, doing your thing, hunting and fishing, you might be feeling man, things are great. I don't know why folks are worried. I don't know why anyone needs to be raising hell, because I'm seeing a ton of deer. I'm having great deer hunting. I'm catching a lot of trout. Yeah. And so there's this worry that if we don't remember the past and the hard work it took to get to where we are now, we won't keep doing that hard work. But then also on the flip side, it's also easy to get focused on you can get stuck in my favorite species world and be so focused on how great it is for whitetails right now that you completely ignore some of the other things you mentioned, like songbirds, like grassland birds, certain upland species. There are these things going on. So it's this tricky balancing act, it seems like, of appreciating what we have now, remembering how we got here, not being gloom and doom, but also recognizing that none of these things last forever and none of them are guaranteed unless we stay on it and keep raising hell. Because even with the good work we're doing, we are seeing these problems in this spot, in this spot, in this spot. How do you balance all that personally for you, Ben? How do you deal with that kind of phenomena that I'm describing here?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think I'm guilty of it because I've made a choice and worked hard, been lucky to live in a place where the water's clean, and I have 9 species of big game living in the county where I live. So it's in a lot of species that are rare elsewhere. So I can kind of get that that kind of blinkered view too of to me the issue is engagement. I mean, I think that if people get involved at whatever level, and I don't care what level people get involved in the outdoors, it's a lifelong process. It's an idea of like, oh, I enjoy white-tailed deer. I enjoy hunting white-tailed deer. I enjoy watching white-tailed deer. I want to learn about white-tailed deer. Oh, I didn't know that 150 years ago they were almost, they were almost extinct, but there were very, very few of them. Why was that? And then in my journey, I educated myself on that, read about that, learned about that. That led me to other writers. That led me to other history books. That led me to conservation. And so I think that to me, like the most radical thing you can do, and the most important thing you can do as a conservationist, is get young people engaged. I've volunteered for the first time this year as a hunter education instructor. It was a great experience. And, I want to do that to, make sure kids have a safe experience, make sure we pass on the hunting legacy. But I also do it because I know was so important for me to have time outdoors, as a kid and as an adult. And so to me people are going to explore this as their own journey, and they're and be interested in what interests them. And if that leads them to a deeper understanding of one species, whether it's ducks or whether it's whitetails or whether it's songbirds or whatever it leads them to, so much the better. I mean, there's plenty of work to be out there for everybody. So I think to me it's just like get people started on the right track, and good things will happen. But it is, I think there's a real, I believe in like strategic optimism. I think that. It's a scary time, but it's always been a scary time. Every generation has, something looming over their head. When I was a kid, everybody was concerned about transcontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear war, and now we have other concerns that are kind of rising to the top. And it's easy to let those things make us pessimistic or like cynical or like just say, oh, the hell with it, it's unfixable. And maybe it's a personality thing, but I just can't live like that. I've seen that like good people getting together make a huge difference, and not like heroes, not big rich people, not big powerful people, but just like everyday folks.
Yeah. I think that's one of the best things about studying the history of this stuff, of the hunting and fishing community, of our conservation past. One of the best things about learning that, studying that, as you mentioned, is just all of a sudden realizing that real, regular people have made a difference. Like none of these things we have here today happened by accident. They are not here by chance. Yeah. They are here because folks like you or me and a whole bunch of our buddies and a whole bunch of folks who cared about this stuff did something. That's very encouraging to me. That's empowering to me. When I'm feeling ever doom and gloom, I remember that. Yeah,
and it can be. I mean, you have to have like what's the right scope to look at things, right? I mean, and if we're all like read the media and like doom scroll all day long, and that's great. That's the world we live in. That's our society. But that's not reality, right? That's not what's real. To know reality, you got to get out and look at it. You got to go out and tromp around and smell what's going on and look at the changes. And I think that as soon as you get older, I mean, you'll see those changes. And, we all have, change can be hard for anybody, but there's like changes I've seen. I mean, I can just, around here, I can see a lot of things have changed. Like, like there weren't any wolves in Idaho when I was growing up. Now there's, to speak of, and now there's lots of them. So there's changes like that. But the habitat has changed so much. So much of the land the winter range has been gobbled up with subdivisions. The weeds are much different. The forest fires are, changed it. And so, the changes will be in your face. I don't think just the times we live in, it's just like a very unstable time. So I think there's always going to be things that people can get engaged about, and some of them are really big, and some of them are more really local, and different people have different appetites and different levels for grappling with however it is. But I believe in making it fun. I believe in, like, we're not going to do this if it's not rewarding. And winning is a lot more rewarding than losing, and that's what field guide racing hell's about.
I want to get into how to win, how to make a difference, but I do have one last kind of foundational question, because this book is about raising hell for, it seems like, 4 categories of related issues that are important to our community. That's, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but right, we could maybe bucket the types of things we're talking here into something that might influence hunting and fishing opportunity, something that might influence wildlife populations in general, and something that might impact habitat. And so there's a whole bunch of different possible targets out there. You brought it up. These are unstable times. There are plenty of things. If you doom scroll enough, there will be plenty of things you can find to cause you to lay listlessly in bed at night and worry if you let yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, as you were writing this book, or as you're sitting here now starting to talk to people about this book, what's keeping you up at night? Is there anything that in your mind you're thinking, man, I sure hope this book helps tackle X, because I personally am worried about this in our future? Is there anything that stands out on that front?
Yeah, a lot of people worry about, like, are the environmentalists too far this way, or, hunting rights is too far that way. And, the thing that worries me is, like, just that people won't give a damn. My thing that worries me the most, I don't think we're going to, the thing that's just destroyed the caribou in Idaho during my lifetime, that is destroying the salmon in the steelhead that I grew up around, that potentially is going to destroy sage grouse, for example, isn't that people, that people care, but most people don't. Most people, don't think about it at all, don't know where their electricity comes from, and would rather, save a few bucks at the gas pump or a few bucks on their electric bill, and would write off a species or an ecosystem because of that, and change our hunting and fishing opportunities forever. It just because they're ignorant or because they just don't care. To me, that's the thing that is like, I just want to, like, get people outside. I want to, like, grab them by the shirt collar, drag them out of their cars, drag them out of the city, and say, look at this,
Yeah.
Look at this place. How can we squander this freedom? How can we squander this beauty? And I think most people don't want to, but they either feel they're overwhelmed with the basics of life, which I get it. They feel like the system is rigged, and I get that too. Or they feel like or they've just never been introduced to it. And so to me, that's the saddest thing of all, is just like people are just going to just squander what we have, as far as our freedom to hunt and fish, as far as the habitat. To me, it's like the habitat is the foundation of it all. Just because nobody stopped to say no. Mm-hmm. Nobody had a better vision.
Yeah. Yeah. That's on my mind a lot too. And I guess that I think sets up perfectly this next portion of your book, I feel like our conversation kind of mirrors your book in a way, is you kind of set that foundation and context at the beginning, and then you move into the tactics, that being the steps to success for tackling one of these issues or mounting a defense. I'm curious first, a clarifying question of sorts. Would you find that, or when you were putting this together and you were developing these steps for success, is this equally applicable to an individual and an organization? Is this something that Mark Kenyon, could do something with this? Or is this more like, hey, Mark Kenyon, if you want to get your local rod and gun club to tackle this problem, or if you want to get your chapter of NDA or BHA or Trout Unlimited to tackle this issue, or if you want to, do something like that, who are these steps most applicable to, or how should we think about these differently if we are in one of those groups or the other?
Yeah, I think that it's both. I think that one individual action is actually critical, and like understanding strategy, just like not wasting your time on rabbit holes, but like focusing and all that is super important if you want to make a difference as an individual. At the same time, it's just the nature of politics is you're not going to get very far if you're only operating as an individual. And there's a lot of ways to do conservation. The field guide focuses on, policy, how to change policies, which are powerful things. But it's both. It's like we need to act as individuals, but we are social creatures, and we are trying to change social structure, social norms, and that requires working with other people. Whether it's an ad hoc bunch of friends trying to do something for their local, the backyard, or whether it's something larger that's pushing a bigger agenda across a larger geography.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with that in mind, then could you walk me through these steps for success? And if you think this makes sense to you, could we maybe walk it through with an example, as if like, okay, let's imagine that, I don't know, like either you can come up with an example.
I don't have to imagine anything.
Yeah. Okay. So
I don't have to imagine. I could pull some out.
So let's do that. Could you talk through that
and like
process?
These steps are, and this is kind of like the real meat of the book. Like you said, the book has kind of some throat clearing at first, which is kind of like a lot of people in your audience probably know that already. Some of the history, kind of the fundamentals of the North American model and the history of conservation. And then the middle of it is the steps to success. Is like what is like the roadmap, right? It's like how do we get to where we want to get to, and how do we get there? And these steps, I mean, like I said, over 20, 25 years, this has really evolved. It's changed over those times, but it's like these are the fundamentals. These are a really good way to think about it. And the first thing is like deciding what you want, right? And a lot of campaigns fail because the goal is just too amorphous. People want to do too much, or people don't have agreement of what they want to get done. They don't know what success looks like. And so, dreaming is strategic, right? So like the first thing that anything's like oftentimes is catalyzed around a threat or a problem people see. But the biggest successes are, dreaming, are like things that we want to see in the future. And so that's, that, and then if you haven't done that, if you don't know where you want to go, you're never going to know when you get there. And so I often tell people, like, imagine yourself sitting around a campfire in 5 years, having beers with your buddies and say, wow, we did that. This is different. And the world is different. Our state is different. Our county is different because we achieved something. And so what would that something be? Yeah. And so, I guess one example I'll use is, and I touch on it in the beginning of the book. It's a real place here in northwestern Montana. I call it Hubble Basin in the book, but it's really called Haskell Basin. And my buddy Steve Thompson and I have used it for 30 years now. It's kind of mid-elevation habitat. It's timberland. It's right next to a booming ski town. It's got, because it's, fairly early successional but really well managed timberland. Is good for whitetails. Just a really reliable place to find whitetails. It's always been open to hunting and fishing and trapping. It's also a habitat for grizzly bears, elk, moose, black bear, lynx. It's just a really neat, rich piece of habitat. And it's like I said, it's got the ski town that's just booming with the big trophy homes, big no trespassing signs, big, like I said, death by 1,000 driveways, strip malls. You can see all around what's going to happen to this land. And around here, a lot of the timber companies became real estate trusts and have been selling their land as real estate. And we knew, and Steve knew as a leader in this community, that this land was going to be on the chopping block soon, because everything around it was. And it was going to get sold. It was going to get sold for, very high scale. What's the word I'm looking for? Upper scale trophy homes. Seasonal trophy homes, and we were going to get locked out, and it was going to lose a lot of habitat value. And so, so that became Steve's goal, and it turns out other people in the community had shared similar concerns. But the idea is, how do we maintain what we've got? The goal would be, we want this piece of ground to stay as it, roughly as it is. Of course, change happens; you can't stop change. But we want it to remain open for hunting and fishing. We want it to. We want it to be well managed. We want to be taken care of. We want it to be a forest, not a subdivision. And so that is the goal, right? That's what the goal wanted. I mean, that's what Steve wanted, and that's what his friends and I wanted. And so that was the important thing, is to have that vision. Paint a picture of the world that you want, and then show a path to lead people to that world. That was the path we wanted. Was Haskell Basin remains in private ownership, but in production.
Yeah,
the working landscape. So that's the first step.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I like the analogy you used in the book about flock shooting, about how
right.
If you just try to shoot into the flock of ducks coming through, you're oftentimes going to miss. You need to be very particular. You have to pick one very specific target. Aim at that target.
I learned that hunting chuckers in northern Idaho. It's like you'd work all day climbing up out of the canyon, and you'd flush something 25, 50 birds in a flock sometimes. And it's just like the first few times I did it, you just point the shotgun and start shooting, and nothing falls, and then you'd be with someone who knows what they're doing, and they're picking a bird, and they drop a triple. And so, that's totally right. I mean, it's all the flock shooting, is exactly what people tend to do. They just have these kind of grandiose ideas. We want to educate the public about the importance of hunting and fishing, or we want to, protect habitat and pass on our legacies. Like, okay, that's all great. Those are all great visions. But like, what does that look like in the real world?
Yeah.
And people, that's the number one reason a lot of campaigns fail, is because, people don't know what they want.
Yeah, I heard something.
But it's in that situation, Haskell Basin, we knew what we wanted.
Yeah, I heard something. I wish I could attribute this quote correctly, but I can't remember where I heard it. So forgive me if you're listening. But I heard someone say once that, to do something like this, to make a difference, to tackle an issue, you need to have a compass and a map. So by that, you need a compass which points to true north. So like what you're actually shooting towards. What are you dreaming for? What is your end goal? So you need that compass to always make sure you're pointed in the right direction. But then you also need a map. And the map gives you the actual step-by-step directions of how do you get to this place you're trying to go. Because if all you do is follow true north, you're going to hit a canyon at one point, and you're not going to be able to get across it. Or you're going to hit a river, and you're not going to realize there's actually a spot you could ford that river, half a mile down. So the map is like, okay, what do I do next? What do I do next? Because I know this absolute destination, and here's the right way to get to that destination. So you need these two things, and you need them to be explicit. And I think for any kind of campaign like this, any kind of, whether it's a local, fishing hole that you're worried is going to get bought up and, become a pond of a trophy home, or if it's, just trying to participate in some larger issue that an organization is doing, I think thinking about this and helping, talking to leadership, or as you, the leader, being very clear about defining that goal, defining those steps. It just seems so crucial.
Yeah, it really is, and it's amazing how much people just they know something's wrong, they know that there's something that can be fixed, but they don't know what that something is yet. And this distraction is because these things take time. It takes a lot of patience. There's so many corollaries between conservation and hunting and fishing in general, but patience is one of them. I've saved up my money, went on a backcountry elk hunt. Hired an outfitter with horses to go way back deep in the bob, something I'd always wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And there's mule deer up there too. And I'm like, should I tell my buddies to buy a mule deer tag? He's like, nope. This is an elk hunt. Mule deer season will be open, but we are focusing on elk. And, it's a lot like that. It's easy to get kind of, I'll do this, but then you'd miss the whole point of the trip.
Yeah, so true. So we define very clearly and explicitly what our goal is, what we're trying to change in the world, what threat we want to address, whatever it is. Second step is then knowing your target audience. Can you talk about that?
That's right. Sure. I mean, that's the thing is we don't have to convince everybody. Our campaigns do not have to be like household names. We're not like McDonald's trying to sell hamburgers on every street corner. It's the idea that we just have to talk to the people who we need to talk to. And so the key is, and it's really key, and almost as key as knowing what you want to do, but is like who matters. Who are the decision makers? Who are the people who have their hands on the levers of power, who are going to make these changes? And that varies depending on what you want. If you want to create a ballot initiative, which we did in one of my first campaigns was a statewide ballot initiative in Montana to enforcement for game farm reform, and we tried to reform the game farm industry in Montana. Our goal was to pass a statewide initiative. In order to do that, you have to convince 50% of the voters that year, plus one, to vote your way, right? So our target audience in that case was everybody who's going to vote in that election. I think it was like 2000. And so that's a bit, in the United States, if it's a larger election or a congressional thing, it's an even bigger scope, right? On the other hand, if like other campaigns I've worked on were like trying to get a county, in Montana we have a lot of beautiful trout streams. People like to build their homes right next to the trout streams, and a lot of counties have created setbacks. So like, let's create a rule that in this county you have to build your house so far away from the stream. There's a lot of good benefits from that, for trout habitat and all flood control and all sorts of things. But let's get a county zoning rule to create this benefit. Well, in that case, your county commission is who you're trying to convince, and all you need is a majority of county commissions. And in much of Montana and much of the country, county commissioners are 3 people. So they have an enormous amount of influence in local communities. So all you have to convince is 2 people that this is a good idea, and they have the power to make it happen. But everything else funnels out of who are we trying to talk to? Who do we need to convince? Who is the decider? Who has the power? Sometimes it's Congress and the President of the United States. Sometimes it's 2 people on the local county commission. But that's absolutely critical, because then that forms everything else.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and easily missed, though. I think, like you said, it's so easy to all of a sudden think that you need to shout your message from the mountaintop to everyone. And I think there can be a lot of wasted effort and energy if you do that instead of being targeted.
Huge wasted energy. I mean, it's expensive, whether it's effort or money, to get your message out there, to talk to people, and like, it's like one of the most time-consuming, exhausting things of any campaign, and is the communications part. And if you're doing it to people who don't care, don't matter, you're just wasting your effort. And then the other thing people often do is spend a lot of time arguing with their opponents. They spend a lot of energy. It's kind of like our opponents sometimes are the guy with the laser beam, and we're the cats chasing them around. You're chasing a little red light around, And it's like, you waste a ton of energy and a ton of time doing that, and it's just a waste of time and it's disrespectful, and it's just not a good idea to spend a lot of your time trying to convince somebody who's already made up their mind.
Yeah.
Right. It's like I say in the field, guys. It's like I'm not going to convince you to eat a lot of tofu or to give up venison for tofu. I may not convince somebody that it's fun to sit in a tree on a cold November morning when nothing's happening. I may not convince them either. But if you're looking for the open-minded people, your audience is like this spectrum. Is like you got your base of support, the people who know you, love you, will follow you where you want to go. The people who are who get it, who are inspired. Those people are really important because you need those people to do a lot of the hard work. But you also need the open-minded people. In a political context, they often call that the swing voters. So the people who, and it's getting smaller and smaller in politics, but it's different in conservation. It's like the people who just haven't thought about it yet, who might be with you and might might follow your way, might fall another way, depending on whose argument's best, who they feel most inspired by or compelled by. And so those two people, your base of support and those kind of open-minded people in the middle of the spectrum, those are the people you need to spend time talking to.
Yeah.
The people on you're dead set against, that's just wasting your time.
Yeah. So we clearly define what we're trying to do. We then clearly define who is this target audience that has some level of influence over our issue, and or who is this movable middle who is open to what we're trying to talk about. The next thing that you talk about of importance is building coalitions. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, let's go back to that example up in here in northwestern Montana with my friend Steve in Haskell Basin. Steve likes Haskell Basin, I do too, because it is good hunting, and you can find huckleberries there in the summertime, morels in spring, but it's a good close spot where you can go after work and rattle in a buck. But not everybody cared about that, right? So the goal they set was to create. They talked to the timber company. The timber company wanted to keep that land in timber production because they had a sawmill to feed, but they were under enormous amount of economic pressure to sell the land because the profits were that's where the profits were. So they figured out, well, if they got some piece of land, they could keep their board, their directors happy. If they got some compensation for it, then they could put a conservation easement on it. They could own the land, but basically sell the development rights so it would never be developed to the city of the local city there. So the goal was to create. They have a local option tax, a local sales tax, and the goal was to create a local sales tax where the city would pay. Everybody who shopped there would pitch in a penny for every dollar to help support this conservation easement to basically pay the timber company so they could put it in, could afford to keep it in conservation easement, and they could still use it. So that's the goal. Came about over a lot of time and a lot of discussions. So what are the different reasons? So if you just got the deer hunters to support it, that's not enough to get us to that threshold of 50% plus one. You needed more people. And so what did other people care about? And that, again, is like the key of knowing your audience. And then the challenge is to put yourself in the audience's shoes and say, why would they care? So what? What's the big deal? And for the timber company, the big deal was they needed a timber supply. For the people who worked in the sawmill and the people who sold, trucks to the logging companies and the people who, the bankers and all that, they are very interested in keeping that sawmill going. The local municipality was very interested because that watershed, that basin, actually was the source of their drinking water for this entire little city, which was going under a lot of growth pressure. And this pure clean water comes out of it. If they had to create another water filtration system and develop another water source, that would cost taxpayers millions and millions of dollars. So you had the timber companies, you had the the hunters and anglers. You had the other recreationists who'd like to use this land for mountain biking and cross-country skiing. You had the timber companies, and you had the city and the local taxpayers. And they all had their own reasons for supporting this plan, but they're all different. They're all individual, and they don't necessarily have anything to do with anybody. But they developed a campaign that wrapped its arms around all of those different viewpoints, and they put it to the local voters, and the local voters supported that proposal by, like, the first time they did it was like 70%, and then the second time they did it, it was 85% of the voters supported to tax themselves a penny a dollar to protect this watershed. So that was a pretty cool example of, like, knowing what you want, knowing who has the power to make the decision, and then understanding how those people are thinking.
Yeah. Power, strength in numbers. When you build those
absolutely.
That group of folks, the diverse voices who are all working towards that same goal, all of a sudden, the possibilities expand dramatically.
Yep. Yeah, we just don't have the numbers. It's a simple mathematics game. I mean, there's a lot of people who hunt and fish. There's about 50 million people who hunt and fish in the United States, but there's, hundreds of millions of voters. And even if we rallied all the hunters and fishermen, we just don't have enough to get over that threshold of, 50% plus one. And that's why we just need, there's no other way. We have to build alliances.
Yeah, and I feel like also, like, when it comes to trying to influence policymakers too, if there's only one contingent of folks who are advocating for an issue, you might be able to, give them a cold shoulder, and maybe that's just a group of people that doesn't matter to that policymaker or to that commissioner or to whatever. But if all of a sudden you are hearing the same thing from this group, and then this different kind of group, and then this surprisingly new perspective of, from a different group of people, if all of a sudden you're hearing it from here, and here, it becomes really hard to ignore, because one of those groups or some of those will be in one way or another influential to you and what your personal goals are as this decision maker or whatever it might be. And I feel like this coalition building step to success ties in really closely to the next one on your list, which is building and maintaining trust. I think those two things have to happen hand in hand to make it work. Can you expand on that next one and how it kind of pairs with this? Because if we're trying to build a group of people to address, this issue, this challenge, whatever it is, we have to build some cohesion within the group, and then ultimately with that target audience too. Yeah,
right. It's all about credibility, and credibility obviously is like the basic currency of communication. If people don't trust you, you're sunk, right? If people think you're a weasel, you're not going to get anywhere. And so that's really easy to blow credibility. But that's, a crucial thing. And that's a crucial thing for, like, where these relationships come up, because not everybody is going to be credible on every perspective. You never underestimate the power of hunters and anglers. Just a side story. We worked in the Montana legislature this year. There were some bills that would have handcuffed the local Fish and Game Agency, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks from owning conservation easements. Some kind of small government Republicans thought that, fiscal conservatives thought, it was like, why are we putting money into this? And so there's some bills that were gonna really cripple our ability to protect access through conservation easements. And the legislator, my local legislator said, he voted against the bill. It's a bad bill. He voted against the bill. And he said, it was just up to me, I would support this bill, but the hunters and anglers, the hunters are against it, and I am too old to outrun the hunters, so I got to vote with them. And so it was like, they had credibility. He cared about that constituency enough on its own. But in that case, these conservation easements are hugely important. They're hugely important for ranchers, for who, and family farms and ranches are under a lot of stress in a lot of places. They're extremely important for the timber industry. If the timber industry is going to survive in Montana, these easements are key. And so we built this coalition of the people who came on our side on this was, Montana Stockgrowers Association, the Montana Wood Products Association, Montana Logging Association, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, along with, environmental groups like the Wild Montana, Montana Conservation Voters, all those kind of groups, Trout Unlimited, So we brought all these different groups together, and that together they had the credibility. And it's like I couldn't say as a conservationist writer, hunter, I can't say, oh, this is important for the timber industry. You need the timber industry guy to say there, the guy with the sawdust and his, on his shoulders, who like works in the woods and has, makes a payroll because he's cutting 2x4s. We need that guy to make that case. Nobody else can make that case for him or her. And so, and then you have to have your facts right. We did the research. We knew, the how many acres, how many individual operators, whether they're ag operators or timber operators, support these things. We knew how many hunter angler days are used on these lands. Get your facts right, but couch them in a larger story with compelling characters.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no substitute for the credibility of real on the ground experience and having those different voices that represent those aspects of the issue.
And to me, that's why it's one of the reasons it's so important that we all as hunters be good ambassadors of the sport.
Yeah.
Because people have a perspective, often misinformed, about what hunting is all about. And hunting is supported by most people. Things that we do, hunting deer, for example, for food and recreation, is supported by like 75% of Americans. It's hugely popular. So we have credibility, but we don't want to blow it. And people do trust us, but they don't. But we need more than just that.
Yeah, and this really nicely then dovetails into the last of your major points, which is one that I spend a lot of time thinking about personally, which is how do we communicate about these things? I have so many questions around how we communicate all these things because everything, I mean, figuring out how to reach a target audience, figuring out how to build coalitions, figuring out how to build and maintain trust, all of that is dependent on what your communication strategy is, how you're going to speak to people about this, how you're going to reach them, how you're going to educate them or inspire them or activate them. There's so much there.
They're going to find them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
No, it's really complex. And again, it depends. Every campaign is unique. I think generally the rules of thumb are that the most personal communication is the most effective communication. Right. There's no substitute for one-on-one sitting down and face to face. That's the best. That's just how human beings are wired to be. But then we can't reach very many people that way. So then we have to use the mass media, and of course that mass media is changing all the time. Everything from email chains to social media platforms to old school media like newspapers and op-eds and letters to the editor. Those are all have a role, but it all comes back to where do my deciders, where's my audience, where did they get their information? And so, like, I try to understand that. So who do these people trust, and what sources of information do they trust, and then go there. So that's the first thing. Is like personal communication is best. Meet people where they are. Don't try to meet them halfway. Understand their language, understand their values, understand their hopes and fears, understand where they're coming from, and go there. Don't try to, if people don't understand why this is so important, you have to explain why it's important. Don't assume that they know what we're talking about. Use the kind of language that they can understand. Try to avoid, the kind of jargon-y kind of stuff that we can fall into.
Yeah. I feel like just jumping in really quick, this, and maybe I'm actually interrupting you before you bring up the next point.
No, go ahead.
But
I'm yakking away.
But when it comes to this, I think it's such a great reminder. It's so easy to to not do this. Like, I think it's very easy when you have an issue you care about and you're trying to advocate on behalf of, it's so easy to want to like bulldoze everyone with your perspective and be like, here's this thing, this is why it's so important to me, and this is how it's going to mess up my life, or this is how you can fix this thing in my life. And the person on the other side of that feel, like you're running him over. And why does this matter to him or her? And I think one example where this probably plays out, and I think something that is really important for folks listening who want to try to start taking action like this is like what we do and what we say when we talk to a congressman or woman, when we talk to one of our representatives, and we're worried about an issue, we want to reach out and share our perspective. I think it's tempting to just be like, hey, Senator Daines, I think that you are doing this thing wrong, or this thing, and I think that you should do X, Y, and Z because this matters to me. And that making that phone call or sending that email is better than nothing. But there might be a better way to do that, which is meeting this person where they are and recognizing what shared common values they have with you. So maybe thinking about, as you just described, like, okay, what does Senator Daines say he cares about? Or what does Senator Stabenow say she cares about? And maybe let's say with Senator Stabenow here in Michigan, let's say, all right, Debbie Stabenow, you have talked so much about how you support agricultural interests, and you talk about the importance of helping folks on the ground, with private land conservation and this thing and that thing. I've heard you talk about this. It's in your platform. Well, let me tell you about this issue that directly impacts the well-being of the farming and agricultural community, and also supports private land conservation of wildlife in our state. And this is why the Farm Bill might be something that, you should be looking at A, B, and C. You're speaking to someone about the things they've already said they cared about. You're talking to them in their language, and all of a sudden, on the other end, they might be able to say, "Well, shoot, he or she's right. This does matter to me, and if that's a thing that matters to this other value I have, then I need to take this seriously and look at this." It just seems like a much more effective way to reach people, not pounding them over the head with what we think, but discussing about what they care about.
What they care about. That's what I mean by you really encapsulate that well. It's like meet people where they are. I remember being at a cocktail party with the U.S. Senator, and he's no longer in the U.S. Senate. But we were talking about some issue, and the guy next, we're like trying to get him engaged. And he just said it point blank. He goes, "How many votes will this bring me?" Mm-hmm. And we didn't have an answer to that question. I'm like, I don't know, maybe a couple times, I don't know, And it was just like end of conversation. The guy walked away and talked to somebody else. I mean, he was just, they want to know how this benefits their constituency. How can they bring this home and say, this is one thing I did for my constituency. My voters, are concerned about the plight of family farms and ranches in Montana. So by God, we got this provision in the Farm Bill that is going to, or this is going to help that, or they, got rid of this bad thing, whatever you got to be able to translate it back to their constituency, and so that's exactly right. It's like it's like back at Haskell Basin again. If we went to the city council and said, "Hey, we need you to put millions of dollars, we're going to tax a bunch of people because we really want our whitetail deer spot protected," we would have gotten laughed out of the room. Yeah, we would have never gotten in the room. But when we could go, "Hey, do you know where your water comes from? Do you know how much that would cost to replace if you have to replace that watershed? Have we got a parade for you to get ahead of? We got to, make it look like this is going to be a winner for you guys. Not like this is going to be something, we want you to do something so onerous for us, but this is going to make you popular. Yeah. This is going to solve problems for you and your constituents." That's how you get people engaged. Like, so what? You have to answer that question, so what? And the other thing is, it's not all, the other thing people tend to do is dump a bunch of facts on people's heads, right? I remember the first campaign I got, that game farm reform campaign. I was, had been a journalist before that, and I got hired onto that campaign. And the first thing I did is start writing white papers. I wrote white papers on game farm and chronic wasting disease, and I had a stack of white papers that thoroughly researched. And the guy who was the leader of the campaign, Doug Mitchell, I learned a lot from him. Took them all and said, "Thank you very much for this hard work," and put them on the corner of the desk. They stayed there. He says, "Remember, you've got to speak to the heart first, the head second." And a lot of us are trained a certain way. We're trained to produce an essay and lay out facts. And here's the data. Here's the counter data. Here's the conclusion. We're taught to think that way. And but that's not how people generally think. That's not what people are motivated by their hearts. They're not just talking about exploitively pushing emotional hot buttons, but by understanding that people want to engage from from the place of their values, from the place of their emotions, and that's where you have to get people to open the door before they even will consider the facts. And that's just human psychology, and we need to, that's part of meeting people where they are.
Yeah, that's something I've had driven home in recent years. Just the power of story and that connecting through the heart. There's I don't know if this quote's exactly right, but it says something along the lines of the greatest argument in the world, the greatest set of facts, the most white papers, none of that's ever changed a mind. The only thing that ever really has is a good story. And there's a lot of truth to that. Now you can use facts and threats and tactics and different things to build that story, but if there's not a narrative, if there's not the connective tissue of emotion that tie or values that tie into that, it's really hard to get someone to actually care and do something.
You think about it. It's just it's how human beings share information. It's and I think it ties directly to hunting. I think you imagine yourself as a hunter, in the beginning of our species on the savannas, okay, we're going to teach this person how to survive. We're going to tell them stories, and it always follows that same arc. Here's a problem, here's the rising, the plot, the rising drama, the characters, the setting, all that's there. And not every culture has peer-reviewed journals. Not every culture has bar charts or iambic pentameter, but every single culture has stories. So that's part of a good campaign, has a good story, and you let your audience become part of that story, invite them to be a hero in that story. And that's a hugely powerful thing.
I really like this formula that you end your section about communication with. You describe, kind of how to develop your messaging. And I think this is something that, an individual could use when trying to develop an email to a senator or a phone call, or this could be used if you are trying to reach out to the general public to engage your chapter members or to engage, your community, or to even as simple as a social media post and you're trying to get your friends and family to rally around this thing. Can you walk me through your formula for that message? It's
Sure. So what is a message? And you talked about compass, and to me a message is kind of like a compass. It keeps me pointing the way I want to go. And every campaign has to have a message. It's just a fundamental part of any campaign. And it's a statement that's designed to influence the opinion or the action of your target audience. And you hear that all the time in political wonky talk. It's are they on message or off message? And the idea is you have something to say and you want to get it across, and you need to repeat it over and over again. And so basically, the components, you have to answer the question of so what? Why does this matter? And that's like the opening, like the bridge to this person. I mean, the example I use is somebody came and knocked on my door the other day, because this is a long time ago now, but knocked on my door, opened the door, and they said, "Hello, you have it looks like you have kids. And there's toys all over the front yard." Yes. And he says, "And it looks like that. Did you know that the kids in this neighborhood walking to school, because of this new subdivision, we have so much more traffic on the street, and that the kids are almost getting hit on their way to school?" I said, "No, I didn't know that." I said, "Well, we want to have a crossing guard at this intersection." So that sounds like a good idea. "And will you please call the school board and call the city council to make sure we get that crossing guard. Here's the number to call. Absolutely happy to do it. Thank you. Goodbye. That kind of exchange. Okay, that message had all the elements. Mm-hmm. It started out speaking to heart first, to core values. That is my family, right? What we that's just something we will go to the wall for. It's something we care deeply about. There are things like that: freedom, our community, our family, our prosperity. Those are kind of like what's what matters here, right? Opening with that. The second thing is, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the threat? It has to be clear. It has to be understandable. And certainly I could understand more traffic going down the street. And so, that's the problem I can relate to. I've seen it. I've not thought about it, but it's something that makes sense to me. Then there's like, okay, so what do we do about it? Well, we have a solution. Again, a common sense solution that's easy to understand. We're going to put a crossing guard. It works. Works all over the town. We just need one here. And then okay, great idea. What do you want me to do about it? We want you to call the city council, call the school board, and make sure it happens, which is easy for me to do. Happy to help. So it had all those four components of the values, the problem or the threat to those values, the solutions, so how we're going to fix the problem, and then the ask, the empowerment, like what can I do about it? And if you don't have all those four components, you don't have a message. You need to go back to the drawing board and think it through. And it does, again, think it through from the perspective of your audience. And that's the component of a message. Anyway, that works. And if you don't have them all, it doesn't work.
It's a simple thing. Like when I hear it out loud or when I see it on the page, it's like, yeah, of course. But I don't think that we think that all the way through most of the times, and we're developing a piece of marketing materials or a social media post or planning a podcast or calling whoever. Like, I think explicitly calling out each one of those things is powerful. Like that little formula right there. I might get it tattooed on my arm, Ben, because it's so important.
Yeah, and like in a campaign, like I will, like if I'm talking to a lot of reporters or a lot of bloggers or whatever about it, I will like take that as 4 bullet points: values, threat, solution, and ask, and I will put on an index card and tape it to my to my phone or keep it in my pocket. So no matter what, I know what to say. I know where to go. And again, you need to tailor it for the audience. A lot of groups, particular kind of ways, these kind of classic environmental groups, have a habit of overemphasizing the threat, of like pounding the drum of like, and it kind of becomes the sky is falling kind of thing. It's like, people just tune it out. We know there's all sorts of bad things in the world, but what do you want me to do? It's like, so you have this, people overemphasize the threat and underemphasize the solution. It's like, no, we have, and we don't have to solve the whole problem all at once. We're not going to solve all of the biodiversity crisis at once, but by God, we can protect this habitat, and that habitat's important. We may not clean up the entire Mississippi River of runoff and pollution, but we can protect this stream. We can protect this headwater. We can connect this stream to that stream. And so, make it less overwhelming, make it solvable. So that solution, I really think it's important that we spend more time emphasizing solutions and less time, drumming bad news into people's heads.
Yeah, so true, and that's something I've thought a lot about as wanting to discuss these things, wanting to bring these things to folks' attention, but trying to figure out how do you do it without losing people? How do you do it without issue fatigue setting in? How do you do it without apathy and folks tuning it out because, hey, I just want to see big deer or I want to do this thing or that thing. And it's natural for all of us to get wore out by these things. But it's funny. You mentioned the same thing, and Jim Posowitz mentions the same thing, and you cite one of his essays in your book. And I talked to Randy Newberg about this recently. He mentioned the same thing, and it's this importance of hope. You cannot effectively advocate or communicate about any of these things unless you also can bring hope to the table. Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. I think, doom and gloom inspires people. doom and gloom inspires people to change the channel and turn you off.
Mm-hmm.
Doom and gloom. If doom and gloom inspired people to save the world, we would have saved the world a long time ago. You know, but that gets back to the superpower of hunters and anglers. Is, you know, we've done this shit. You know, we were in the bottom of the ninth on so many species, and we lost some. But we have showed how, you know, if you protect habitat, if you get some manners about how you treat these creatures, we can win. And that is, you know, that was, you know, Posowitz. And I don't know if you ever knew Pos, but he, you know, that's just his personality too. He was just a glowing, optimistic person, and it was just a jolly fight for him every time. I'm sure in private moments that wasn't the case, but he just kind of bubbled with like, yeah, we can. We've done it. People's done it. Here's a story. I'll tell you how somebody did it here. You know, this is what really matters.
Yeah, that's so powerful.
And especially with kids. You know, I'm really concerned about kids these days and the messages we're sending them about their future. And you know, I know there's a lot of data behind a lot of doom and gloom, but it's not going to change anything.
Yeah. I've been hearing about this phenomenon now. They're calling like doomerism, I think.
Yeah.
And just this idea that there's a growing segment of folks who are just throwing their hands up and saying, forget it. What can I do? There's nothing I can do. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket in this way and that way and this way. Yeah. So I'm going to bury my head in the sand and play my video games or you know, just do my one thing, or just hunt and fish and ignore everyone around me. And unfortunately, that might be therapeutic to ignore everything that's going on around and not do anything about it, but it's not going to lead to a practical outcome that's going to be good for you in the future either.
You remember that? You remember that Far Side cartoon where it's like the guys are fishing in the little rowboat, and there's like a mushroom cloud going off in the horizon. It goes, you know what that means, Joe? It means screw the limit. You know, it's just like, I think it was like people kind of do that. It's like that kind of end times kind of nihilism, and it's just so cheap and easy. You know, it's so easy to be cynical. It's just like it just gives you an opt out. It's just like, I don't have to work hard. I don't have to think about it because this is, you know, and we're all born to our point in history. We have no control over that, but I do believe the best is yet to come.
Yeah. Well, I think history can guide us and can inspire us. Like you said, like we're right there on the precipice, and we pulled out of it, and we saved a lot of these things, and we have a much better situation than we could have if folks didn't stand up and raise some hell 100, 130 years ago. And now it's our turn. You know, I think that's right. I think there's something powerful in your identity, and as a hunter and angler, we can proudly point back to our history of doing these things. People just like us, our grandparents, the folks who lived in our community 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, the people that did this kind of stuff, cared about these kinds of things, stood up, they raised hell, they acted, they did something about it. And we have these amazing wild places and wild critters and hunting and fishing opportunities today only because of that. And we are the same people. Right. Like, we've got that same DNA. We've got that same culture. Yep. We are those people now that I really hope 50 years from now, people will be telling stories about us. And I think it's true. Yep. I think it can happen.
That's true. I've seen it, you know, and I'm getting up there, but I've seen it I've got local heroes, national heroes, and it doesn't have to be huge, you know, it doesn't have to be Teddy Roosevelt, you know. I think sometimes we get in this trouble of like, well, it's the job of the president to do this. It's like, it's all of our jobs to do this. Our job to create the pressure to force the politicians to do it. You know who Uncle Robbie Roosevelt was?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard the story of Uncle Robbie Roosevelt?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like Teddy's uncle, who was kind of a philanderer and kind of a playboy and not really very well respected. But he took Teddy fishing, and he took Teddy bird watching when Teddy Roosevelt was a little boy, and got Teddy Roosevelt interested in the outdoors, and went on to become this, you know, whatever he was, conservation giant, president, megalomaniac, all those things that Teddy Roosevelt was. But none of it would happen if Uncle Robbie hadn't taken him out fishing. And so it's not always the it's not always the big powerful people who are important. I mean, they are important. We need them, but you never know. You never know how these things we do are going to play out and how they can like have huge benefits for generations to come. That's just beyond our ability to conceive sometimes. And to me, that's a hopeful thing.
Yeah. And I'll say I'm very glad that we've got a tool like this book to help us do that, to help raise some hell.
Field Guide to Raising Hell. And it's fun. I mean, it's conservation is fun. Fun is like a funny word. Maybe that's not the best word, but it's rewarding. It's not fun to elk hunt and get up in the middle of the night to climb a mountain and to pack 80 pounds of meat off your back. That's not always fun. But when you slam the tailgate shut, it's enormously rewarding. And it's the same thing with conservation. There's a certain amount of work to it. There's a certain amount of drudgery to it. But my gosh, when it works and you can sit back and say, hey, this place would be totally different. This little piece of nature, this mountain range, and I've worked on like 6 million acre projects up in the high Arctic. I've worked on 1 square mile projects in the outskirts of Los Angeles. And, you're making a difference for people in the long run, no matter where you are or what scale you're working on. And it's a damn cool thing.
Awfully rewarding, that's for sure. Well, Ben, I wish we had another hour or two to talk because there's a lot here that I love talking about, and it is fun. But in the interest of me getting my son to school in time today, we've got to wrap it up. But I thank you.
That's important.
I thank you so much for writing this book.
Maybe sometime we can get together and talk hunting whitetails more.
Yes.
But for right now, I really appreciate it. Again, the book is called The Field Guide to Raising Hell, Hunter and Angler Field Guide to Raising Hell. You can find it on Amazon. I appreciate the chance to talk about it.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and I can't recommend it enough. I think it's a great tool for folks to look back on, to be reminded how to do these things in a smart, thoughtful, strategic way, how to really make a difference. This book gives you the tools to do that. So go out, buy a copy, and get to work.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. Keep up the great work.
All right. Thank you, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I appreciate you being with me on this journey over the last month. We've learned a lot. I think we've had to think about a lot of things. We've hopefully been armed with the tools and the ideas and the knowledge and the skills to know what that next step is that we can take. I think, as we talked about on the front end of this conversation, that to be a deer hunter today, or a hunter of any kind, to be an angler of any kind, it's going to require more than just being good at shooting stuff, or scouting, or casting a line, or setting the hook. That's all great and good, and it's fun, and it's what gets us fired up and out there. But none of these 650 some podcasts I've done in here, none of it's possible unless we have the resource, the places, the deer, the creatures, the opportunities, the privileges, and none of that is guaranteed. We are owed none of it. We've got to fight for it. So let's raise some hell. Let's do some good work. Let's have a good time. And until next time, let's stay wired to hunt.